one on May 27th, and I call to order the Village of Lake Bluff Finance Committee meeting. Roll call, please. Marlene, do you have everybody who's in attendance?
Yes, I have everyone.
Okay, so we have the committee of Barbara, Bill, and Aaron, all the other board members.
Correct.
Okay, and we have Megan Michael as well.
Yes.
Okay. Great. So the first order of business on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our last virtual finance committee meeting, which took place on April 27th. Do I have a motion to accept?
So moved. And second, please.
Thank you.
In reviewing the minutes, does anyone have any corrections, questions? Okay. Hearing none. All in favor?
Roll call vote.
Oh, roll call. Thank you.
Yep.
Marlene, could you do a roll call vote for the approval of the minutes, please?
Sure. Chair Ankerman,
Aye.
Trustee Meyer,
Aye.
Trustee Toll,
Aye.
President O'Hara,
Here.
Village Clerk Michael, Megan Michael,
I'm here.
Trustee Charlo,
Here.
Trustee Dewart,
Here.
Trustee Marquis.
You're on mute, Joy.
Here.
Thank you. Drew,
Yep, present.
Tina,
Here.
Glenn,
Here.
Attorney Freeman.
Here.
Okay, now that was an attendance roll call or passing the approval of the Finance Committee minutes for April 27th?
That was apparently an attendance roll call. The roll call for the passage of the minutes requires only the board members to be called.
Got it. All right, so could we have another roll call with just the board members for the approval of the minutes of the April 27th
And
meeting?
to be, Marlene, just the
Yes.
finance committee members.
Okay. Chair Ankerman,
Aye.
Member Meyer,
Aye.
Member Toll.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have anyone who is not on the agenda for discussion? Anything to be discussed? Glenn, did anybody call in? Drew, did anybody email?
We've had multiple emails which have been distributed. I do see that Mr. Jeff White's on the phone call. He was the one who had submitted some communications along with some of his neighbors regarding the Boardman Court, but that is on the agenda. But certainly if Mr. White has something, his hand is raised, so.
Well, if it's okay to take it now, we could actually change the order of the meeting. Is that correct? And we could do the discussion regarding the FY 21-22 revenue and expense modifications. Is that
We
okay?
could. I think it'd be helpful though if Mr. White had a chance to, I don't want to speak for him. I know he has expressed desire for the village to take on that Boardman Court project. I didn't want to speak for him unnecessarily. If he has something to say now that's for something additionally that's not related to the agenda.
Got it.
Would you like us to recognize him?
Please.
Yes.
Jeff, you're able to speak, but you are on mute.
Can you hear us now? Although it is Michelle White, his wife, I'm just
Oh.
using his computer, but
Good.
he's here. But
Great.
can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So we just wanted to thank you for the time today. And I do think you all had received the information my husband had sent. And I do believe neighbors have sent letters to you. And our goal really is just to make you aware of how difficult our situation has become. We live at 100 Boardman Court. We've lived in the village for over 16 years. And the flooding issue we've had, I have to say, has not only taken a financial toll on us, the emotional and anxiety toll has just become unbearable. We know there's a lot going on in today's society. We know with the pandemic, but we respectfully request that you take into account what has gone on to get us to this point and what is at risk, not just for us, but for our neighbors. It's been a very lengthy process to get here, and at times probably seems funny, but it's felt like my second job. All plausible solutions that we have proposed to fix our flooding over the last 3 years have been rejected by the village for various reasons, but there has been no other alternative we could come forward with to fix the flooding. And I think if you guys have seen the video, it's not just a little bit of flooding. It is a tremendous amount of water that we take on 3 to 4 times a year. And it comes all from which street is it?
Over from Green Bay and Forest Hills.
From Green Bay and Forest Hills. Our area suffers incredible flooding. Since the 2017 flood, Lake Bluff Village committed to improve the public infrastructure. However, at that time we were told our problem was just difficult. They didn't know what to do. It was difficult, and it wasn't an easy one to solve. For 3 years, we've worked on it, and we're finally here with the approvals. And again, the rules are changing. Drew told us, he did give us a heads up that the recommendation was to delay our project yet once again. So it's not a huge project, I don't think, in comparison to the full budget. But again, I understand there's a lot going on. But the significant impact of the lives of us who suffer from this flooding is just incredible. Not fixing it leaves us considerable risk, not just our property damage, but also the depressed value that we're going to see from our home. And actually, trustees, we're to the point, I don't know that I could sell my home with this flooding. And with the pandemic, it also affects us as homeowners and as people too. And it's just really concerning for us that would we have to walk away from our property in Lake Bluff, which would be really concerning. So we just wanted to speak to you and let you know there are real people, real families, and real lives behind this that are being impacted. So thank you. That was all I wanted to say.
Well, thank you for your comments. And we did receive the letter as well as video, and the video was very powerful. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
We will be bringing up the discussion as the third item of business. So perhaps we'll go back to the regular order of business, with the first discussion being regarding payroll processing. And we've had a payroll processor for a couple of decades, and Drew and Bettina, you are going to present a potential payroll provider change.
Yeah, in an effort to keep things as simple and as short on some of these other items, I think
Yes.
the memo covers really most of it. It says that we can stand to improve our services internally, including customer service, by switching providers and result in a savings.
Right.
And so what the plan would be, if should the finance committee agree with this recommendation, we would take it to the village board at the next, would you go to the next meeting, Bettina, or you want to? Yeah, so we take it to the village board with your recommendation to have it approved. This item, while it's within my spending authority on a regular basis, it's one of those, like, we've been using ADP for decades, and I don't think I even signed the agreement. It predates me. So,
Right.
but the idea of something, we'd bring it to the board and approve, and should you wish to do so.
Right. So upon reading the memorandum that discusses the payroll provider change, I noted that the new provider Paylocity had offered some additional one-time incentives, like 3 months of free service worth approximately $2,300, and the savings that we would reap moving forward would be significant, in addition to the benefits of additional services. So were there any items that any other members wanted to discuss?
Just a quick question. Is there anything that the Paylocity or that ADP provides that Paylocity does not provide?
Bettina, you want to handle that?
So ADP has a very broad range of services that they provide. Unfortunately, each one's segmented into their own module, if you will, and each module requires its own implementation, and there's costs associated with each piece. We haven't fully explored, all the costs associated with every part of every HR functionality that would meet this package. I do know that it would cost more. So with having said that, I'm sure that yes, they probably have the same functionality, My personal experience with the product itself has not been very favorable. And I was looking to move in, especially with the cost incentives and the reduction, to one product that would point us to just simplify the processes. I don't know if that answers your question.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bettina. I mean, I trust if you think this is the best product for the village and it saves us money, then let's.
So do we have any further discussion, or would you like to make a motion to recommend that this be brought to the board?
Well, I'm on board with Aaron, and I so move.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye. Are we supposed to do a roll call, guys?
Yeah, we should do a roll call on every vote,
Got it.
except the vote to adjourn.
Okay. Marlene?
Okay. So the whole board, not
Just
just
the committee, just the committee.
the committee for each one? Okay. Chair Ankerman,
Aye.
Member Meyer,
Aye.
Member Toll.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is a discussion regarding a Lake Forest, Lake Bluff intergovernmental agreement. And this stems back from a number of years with what we were being charged for patient transport and non-transport services from the city of Lake Forest. And there's quite a history and quite a number of ways that staff looked at this. Drew, do you want to talk about your analysis that was and discussion that was put forth with the city?
Yeah, so we had years of discussion, literally years of discussion, trying to find an equitable way to address their desire to charge the village for services that they were providing, which historically had not been items that the village was paying for. And to be fair, when they show up for service and a patient declines transport, they do face expenses and risk and liability, and we're not being compensated for it. And so this, I would say, really a dispute that we had with how we viewed the intergovernmental agreement went back years. I think this is the plan that we talked about previously, and this is, staff thinks is a fair way to approach this moving forward, and also looking back for the last several years, which have been agreed upon as open dispute. So I think we're all ready to get closure on this. I think this is a fair approach moving forward. I'm hopeful in the future that, and Trustee Toll is familiar with this, I know the idea that services are certainly provided, but it's definitely very difficult to get payment for certain non-transport or providing care, anything that really that's non-transport, but that's not to say agencies aren't doing it. So if everyone is comfortable with this, this will come back to the next village board meeting as well. There are some other minor agreement changes having to do with like fire dispatch services and some other minor tweaks. We'll adjust the term and kind of really restate the intergovernmental agreement. I noted on this my cover memorandum that I'd be providing a draft redline IGA. I didn't get it until really the first version I got yesterday, and then I got another one this afternoon. It was not ready for prime time. My goal is to get it to you all and ready to go by the next board meeting here in the coming week or so. But the goal is to get this done. And it'll probably involve us coming back also very soon thereafter to amend our fee structure to reflect a similar type pay structure to match up with this new Lake Forest structure.
So we don't need to delve into all the details, but I did note that when you presented the various scenarios and the analyses, there were timeframes of 8 years and 4 years that were kind of looked at to assess how much we were paying. And can you just speak a little bit to that time period and how that influenced how the discussions went?
Yeah, so we looked at a longitudinal window saying how would this impact us over time had we been subject to this agreement.
Got it.
And in the fees, how that would have impacted us had it been, for a number of years, the village was able to negotiate a cap on what Lake Forest charged us. This new agreement will have a cap. It's set up differently. It will be higher. It'll be based off a budget number versus an actual straight line number. Lake Forest principally was not going to be in a position of what they called subsidizing Lake Bluff calls, and they were, according to their own numbers and the cost of service. And we looked at what they were charging us, and what we did a similar analysis, and we came up with the same numbers. I mean, this is market. This is what's happening. But we did, we looked at a longitudinal study to see what this would look like, and so it helped us to determine, is this a reasonable rate and so forth. So that's how we ended up with these figures and why we looked at that time period.
Right. So it's not just Lake Forest saying, these are the numbers, this is what it is. It's us looking at what we do as well, and kind of coming to an agreement that it really is, this is what it's going to cost, and this is equitable, it's fair.
Yeah, and there's no doubt. I mean, again, Trustee Toll is in this business. There's definitely, I mean, to think that Lake Forest is not incurring, again, cost, risk by coming to calls and getting turned around, it's fair to say that we should be paying something. And what that looks like was certainly debatable, and we fought long and hard, and this is not our first choice, and it was not Lake Forest's first choice. So I think that's usually the sign of people have reached a good resolution when neither party is exactly happy with the outcome.
Right. Now, at this point in time, I know that we had a larger number that was in dispute, and then we paid a number of invoices. Where do we stand in terms of, being current?
Yeah. So Bettina, do you want to handle that? I know she was on the phone today with the finance director of Lake Forest about that very question, and about what our plan is should the board approve this, what that would look like in terms of payment terms for the prior amounts, assessments.
So to date for the fiscal year ending April 30th, we've made 3 payments for 3 quarters. The 4th quarter invoice typically comes out at the beginning of this year, and we book it back. So having received that invoice, I was waiting for an agreement to be agreed to so that we could use the formula and apply it to the existing invoice and not create additional back payments. Having gone through a conversation with the finance director in Lake Forest, Elizabeth Holland, we've agreed to continue to pay the transport fees for the existing invoice received, and that we would go back and pay the FY16 and FY17 differentials from fiscal years 20 expenditures. And then in fiscal year 21, we'd pay the additional amounts for fiscal year 18 and 19. And then in fiscal year 22, the last outstanding balance from the current year fiscal 20 differential. So what does that look like from a cash perspective? For the fiscal year ending, we had budgeted $468,000 in ambulance fees for FY20. It's going to put us over by about $16,000, and that includes 2 years of back pay. The 2 years looking forward, I believe we've budgeted correctly to include the total sums of payments, and there shouldn't be a problem. I don't know if does that answer your question, Barbara?
Well, I was just concerned about, because the window that we had looked back, 8 years or 4 years, and it was sliced and diced a lot of different ways. I was just concerned that there might be big makeup dollars that needed to be, sent out, and I wanted to be sure what the cash flow was going to be regarding that.
Yeah, so we had planned for making payments in a more narrow window generally. I think, how big the spikes were, but we had planned a more narrow window, kind of anticipating that we would reach a resolution soon. And so it'll be a comfortable payment plan.
Right. And also just looking at the number of calls that we have, it's, topped out a little bit over 300 a year, but, in the last year it was less than that. And so we don't see that. Every year we have to look at what the trend is, but it seems like we as a village are comfortable with about where we are in terms of the number of calls. And I don't know if, that's going to be very different with COVID. It might be maybe higher in terms of some types of calls and lesser with other types of calls. So do you see any real difference year to date with activity with calls for emergency transport?
I can answer that one. Our volumes have actually been lower. So people are not calling an ambulance and not wanting to go to the emergency room for their minor ailments, which the vast majority
Some of them are
transport-
minor and some are not, right, Aaron? Some
Yeah.
people have like put off some real health scares that they're finding out now.
Right. Very true. That's very true. So the volumes are down, the acuity is up. But I think looking at the numbers historically, they've been pretty much even year to year for the past several years. So I think, once things settle down and going forward, I think we can be pretty comfortable with the numbers that are on here.
Okay.
I do have one comment
Mhm.
about this, and then also a question. So it's interesting that the negotiation was included payment for canceled calls. That seems I've just never heard of that. I've never heard of that in the fire service ever, to be able to bill for a canceled call. So I know it's not expected to be that much as far as what we might have to pay, but that was just a really it was a surprise to me to see that. The question that I have though is Lake Forest going to be billing the patients at all, or is this strictly out of our budgets?
They've always billed and done collections as part of the agreement.
Yeah, so they are not only getting potentially over $1,500 from the village, but probably the same from each patient as well.
But that's netted out. That gets adjusted. So at the end of each year, each fiscal year, there's a small lapse of time, and then they do a true up.
Okay, so the process itself is remaining the same. It's just
Yes.
the numbers are changing. Okay.
Yeah, the two biggest variables in the cost we face are, you've already identified, quantity of calls, right? The number of calls we face. If we have one call, we're in great shape. But we always have more than one call. And hopefully we stay under 300, right? But we do average less than one call a day. And which is, again, when we've talked about in the past, is this a business we want to get into? And the answer is always, we don't have the volume to make it. Doesn't make sense. It's not a good business model. And it's not a good for business model for people who have a lot more calls than we do. It's, the village ends up subsidizing these calls to some degree, always. The other element is what they charge us for the base call, because everything, gets steered off that. So obviously, in terms of what is a rate, the cost, the actual cost per call. And so the idea is, what helps us is if Lake Forest has 10x calls, we're better off because their denominator involves that too, right? So the idea of as long as their service area grows, that helps us because their cost per call goes down and ours does as well. So we are advocates for them of adding service area.
Drew, any idea what they charge their own residents?
A lot less than this. And we've talked about that. That was one of the arguments we made for an equity. We jokingly said residents that live on the border should roll across the municipal boundaries and have a cheaper rate if they can manage. But it's one of the things that Lake Forest acknowledges, that they are subsidizing the calls of their residents and for non-residents in their community. That's something that they acknowledge they do, and maybe that's not the long-term plan, but at least that's what has been the policy to date is, they know that their costs aren't covering the call or coming close to it. And they view that as, they're paying for it through the property taxes. And that's how, it's a mixture of tax and a user fee, which is usually the case.
Okay, thanks.
To your first point and comment, Member Toll, about the low frequency, but sometimes it does happen where we turn them around after we get a call. That is a low volume event, but they wanted to understand that that required them taking an ambulance out of service from their district, taking it out of their potentially, out of the barn and out somewhere else and taking it away. So that's what they wanted to make sure they captured fees for that. Wear and tear.
So to make it as high level or simple as possible, what would be the rate per call? Is it different for whether,
Different every year.
but I mean, for the next, for this fiscal year, what would we expect per call?
So they're going to budget a number that's going to be, let me get to that spreadsheet. Bettina, maybe you have this at your fingertips.
Yeah, the net cost per call is $1,699.
And there is no cap, or at one point, I know there was a 4% cap. Is there a cap in play?
There is a 4% cap in play. The billable fully loaded cost was $22.53 minus the insurance adjustment of $554 gets us to the net cost of $16.99.
Got it. So you're looking for a recommendation from the Finance Committee members to bring this final agreement to the board. Will you be sending that redlined agreement to the Finance Committee before then? Do you need us to look at that before we present it to the board, or is it just kind of like technically getting all the legal ins and outs?
It's the words are going to match the spreadsheet,
Okay.
right? So that's what it is.
Got it. So do we have any further discussion on the intergovernmental agreement? And do we have a motion then?
I would point out that Drew and Bettina have done a very good job here of working with a very difficult situation. Drew and I were involved with the initial discussions with the City of Lake Forest, and this is Drew referred to it as one of those usual compromises where neither side is perhaps at great advantage, but I think that that this is a fair resolution and is certainly better, puts us in a better position than we were in when this journey began.
Yes, Mark, I will agree with you also in on those discussions. This is a compromise. I'm certainly not thrilled with this. I suppose Lake Forest would have liked a lot more, but it is a compromise, and we will move on, and we will always continually reevaluate as we do with looking at the position of our fire department and where we may or may not go in the future.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Is there a time frame as far as is there an expiration date or any point at which this is going to be reviewed next?
So yeah, well, and that's part of the conversation, that one of the things that was not addressed with the most recent version that I saw was the expiration date was, I'm going to say like a year and a half away. And so that's one of the things I wanted to talk about with the city manager of Lake Forest about, do we want to go back and revisit this so soon? And because there's always, and I can remind, for those of you who have never seen this IGA, there is a 12-month out. Both communities have an ability to pull the cord and say, hey, I'm sorry, we're going to get services elsewhere. Say the Village of Libertyville came in and said, hey, we'll give you the ambulance service half price. Okay, here's our notice to Lake Forest. We'll switch teams and pick up service there. That hasn't happened. We've talked to them, but hasn't happened. But so the idea of we have a way out and they have a way out, and so the term becomes less important, other than the idea of when do we need to get together and review this. There were some things in here like the idea about the dispatch. The village has been with Glenview Dispatch, as is Lake Forest, for a number of years. We never went back. We didn't think it was worth our time to go back and revisit for that reason alone, right? So
Right. Regis?
Yes. So, just to put everything in perspective, I've been looking at the spreadsheet closely. To put everything in perspective, and I know we talked about it before, but what would be the cost of hosting that ourselves? And asking Aaron about that. And I know this is 24 hours. We need to buy the equipment. We need to host people and so on. What would be the comparative cost if we were to do that ourselves, Aaron?
Fire Chief Graff has studied this in quite detail, and we did put together a proposal at one point. And Drew probably has the numbers in his brain better than I do at this point. I think this IGA is not significantly different as far as cost than what we've done in the past. And we've always said, well, if it gets significantly more expensive to have Lake Forest provide the ambulance, then that would be the time to do it ourselves. But at this number, in my opinion, it's not there yet, because just the upfront costs of getting the ambulance, getting the equipment. That's a pretty big upfront investment. I think ongoing would be a bit more reasonable, especially assuming that we stayed a part-time. But Drew could probably chime in and give some more info.
Yeah, I think the issue, part of it is, could we even staff it? The idea, our model is, Aaron called it part-time. It's really, it's volunteer stipends. That's what we're doing. And it is what we're doing today with trying to provide advanced life support without transport. We can manage, I'll say, most of the day, but in the evenings, we'd have a hard time staffing it with volunteers. And then you'd say, okay, well, how would you do it? Then you'd probably bring part-timers back on, and then you start introducing different benefit schedules, and then the numbers start climbing pretty rapidly in terms of longevity costs with healthcare IMRF and so forth. I'm sorry?
What I was trying to do was to put in a perspective. I was trying to put us in a perspective that is, well, you know what? Lake Forest IGA might be expensive, but if we were to do that ourselves, the cost would be 3 times more, or it would be 50% more. I was trying to get an understanding. I'm not really sure that.
I was leading to that.
What we have here is actually pretty good, but just to put it in perspective for us to be clear about it, that's all.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I'd probably chime in here and perhaps point out that I assume that our having this IGA with Lake Forest means that we are at least taking advantage to some degree of the economies of scale that Lake Forest presents. And yep. Drew, I think, as you alluded to earlier, as their service area expands, those economies of scale provide further benefit. As long as our analysis indicates that we are getting at least some portion of the benefit of those economies of scale, then I assume this continues to make sense.
Yeah, I'm looking at the last time we were looking this, and Bettina, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's a factor of almost 2x in terms, I think it's like at least $500,000 more to take this on. And then that's also assuming that we can find it and staff it to the level necessary to actually get approval from the Illinois Department of Public Health to say we're running an ALS transport and we're meeting all their standards.
Now, we could get on our own economies of scale if we got into the business of selling ambulance services, but, I'm not necessarily inclined to be doing, kingdom making here or anything unless there's a really compelling reason.
No, and the reason we thought we had a shot when we had Knollwood as a partner, it made more sense if we could pull it off with a bigger service area. And even then, it's difficult. We somewhat entrepreneurially thought that we could sell back services to Lake Forest for areas that are on their northern border and other areas that we could probably provide service to quicker. So we were looking at that way as well. And where else could we sell the service? Are there areas up north that we could sell? So we explored all that not too long ago when we were kicking around the idea of joining arms with Knollwood.
And just for discussion purposes, there is a third model as well, that if we, down the road, if we don't like the IGA anymore and we don't want to provide the service ourselves, we could, there are departments that staff their ambulance with private ambulance personnel. So they contract to have the paramedics stay in the station. So there is a third model that's in use in many places. So it's not just a Lake Forest or Lake Bluff.
We got a quote for that too. We looked at that, and that was not same deal. It was better in certain regards in terms of, like Lincolnwood does that, right? But it didn't make sense. Again, it's a volume thing. When you're averaging less than a call a day, it's an expensive overture.
Yeah. And recall too that, as Drew pointed out, the IGA does provide the 12-month cancellation provision. So we are in control of this, albeit not within a 12-month window, but as circumstances change or we choose to reassess, we do have that option and the opportunity to take another look on a continuing basis.
So I'm trying to remember if we had a motion yet to present this, to recommend
I
this.
don't believe we have yet.
Board,
So moved, Chair Anchorman.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor? Oh, roll call, please.
Chair Anchorman,
Aye.
Member Meyer,
Aye.
Member Toll.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, back to the discussion regarding the FY 21-22 revenue and expense modification. All of you have received a memo from Drew and Bettina that talked about, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we do anticipate some revenues declining. And in light of that, we had had some discussions about some transfers from the general fund. But as we continue to reevaluate, there's more information that's gathered and more planning that would be necessary should revenues fall even more significantly. So Drew and Bettina, did you want to present the analysis of the general fund balances and the expenses that we could look at?
Would love to. And I will say this, I will provide a little bit of context. We talked about, it was not long ago that the village board considered and approved a modified budget that we'll walk through a little bit of those changes tonight and then talk about another round of modifications. We had told you all that as time moves on, we'll get better information and better data to share. It's so early. There's not a lot of good new information, although I will say certain things have clarified in terms of what, is going to happen at the state level, at least early with LGDF and some of those. So those are the local government distributive funds. And we've actually gotten a new stream of revenue that's from the Illinois Department of Transportation. The state issued some bonds and gave us some new monies that went into the MFT fund. So that was kind of a fine, but at the same time, we're expecting MFT to drop because people are driving less, taxes are lower. So it's a little bit of trade-off here and there. So again, the crystal ball is still very murky, but we did want to, it gets to a point where, and we're already there in certain projects, certain capital initiatives that you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, right? So we wanted to check in with you all and say, here's some things that are on the horizon that we are very close to either putting out to bid or finalizing, taking the final steps on before we put it out to bid or bring to you for award. We wanted to share those with you all and say some of these things we've kind of tried to highlight is either using the traffic signal analogy, either a red light, so let's hit stop button, hard stop, yellow, let's watch it, maybe the village takes it on as the crystal ball gets clearer, and a green, these things we recommend full bore, and we can get into the why of some of those given the time we have left. We have 50 minutes before the board meeting starts. So Bettina has put together a presentation to walk you all through that, and then we can jump to, I wanted Village Engineer Jeff Hansen, he's on this call to really speak about the Boardman Court project, which I know the Whites are interested in, and many of you have expressed comments on it. Is there a way to find a way to make this happen? How is this prioritized? Should we make this happen? So I let Bettina give her presentation, and then Jeff can speak if that's all right with you, Chair Anchorman.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Glenn, can you let me share the screen?
There you go.
Thank you. So the recent court, can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So the recent quarantines and changes in the ability of many businesses to function normally could materially affect the village's finances in the short term. There's no recent similar financial stress to use as a baseline in extrapolating the financial impact on the village, but based on state of Illinois budget management reports and other economic data available, assumptions were made to project at a high level the possible financial impact. Assumptions were made to these significant sectors of general fund revenues. Overall, we see the current environment impacting revenues to a greater degree than expenditures. In terms of revenues, we've estimated the percentage of normal revenues to be received in each month based on the average from the prior year, and then reduced each month based on a specific assumption. Property taxes in theory are a year behind for collection in Illinois and should not be significantly impacted, although payments may be slower or delayed, and there are slight reductions in the allocation of penalties as the due dates have been delayed by the county. So as you know, payments were originally June and September, and now homeowners have the ability to pay and spread them over 4 payments, June, August, September, and November. Sales tax impact will vary based on types of businesses. Overall, from the months of May through August, a 50% reduction was assumed, and then a slight increase in September through October, and November through April rebounding, assuming that the state remains on target with the phases as outlined by the governor's office. Income tax. Municipalities get about 5.7 cents on every dollar collected, and about 80% of the income tax comes from individuals. With reduced employment, lower personnel income tax payments are expected. Additionally, lower economic activities will impact business remittances, and the assumptions used were similar to the sales tax assumptions. Use and utility tax assumptions are also directly tied to business closures and reduced utilizations. Telecom and excise tax declines are related to the potential lag in state allocations. Fines and fees reductions are based on reduced traffic and the focus of current operations as related to community needs. Food and beverage tax declines are assumed at 75% for the early months of the year and 40 to 50% for the remainder of the year. This is tied to the business restrictions imposed by the governor's orders, which does not allow items prepared to be consumed on premise. And so the 1% tax is based on items prepared for consumption on premise. Building permit fees have seen an overall decline in the past few years, with FY20's revenue falling $38,000 short of the $400,000 estimate. Based on current activities and continued declines, a conservative projection of $213,000 in annual revenues, or a 47% decline, was assumed. And interest income is historically very conservatively based. The assumption percentage of decline is related to the market and rate declines. So this chart that was in the memorandum just displays the anticipated declines in dollars and percentages, which total about $1.6 million. As expected, sales tax declines will likely have the biggest impact for Lake Bluff. This just outlines the various taxes and the amounts of the original budget, the first version, and the second version as provided in the memorandum. I think I've shown this, oh, nice. I've shown this slide before with numbers. Total sales tax on general merchandise is 8%, and the village receives 1% of the general, 7% sales tax, as well as 1% of the home rule sales tax. This just gives a brief, quick snapshot of the various categories of sales tax, and obviously showing the automotive as the biggest contributor to that revenue source. In terms of additional expenditures, COVID-19 expenses are being charged to the contingency general fund expense line, and the budget as approved includes a $200,000 expenditure that will be used to include any expenditures related to supplies, additional technology, and also the local grants. The FY20 total expenses were about $25,000, and FY21's expenses will likely only be tied to the local grant funds dispersed. So the list above, included in the memorandum, are capital projects that could be deferred to offset revenue declines. General fund balances will be reviewed shortly. The impact of the current financial environment will vary by fund. Given the uncertain duration, the financial impacts will change, and it's important to also highlight other areas of concern. As Drew had mentioned, motor fuel tax declines lower travel in the months. So we're looking at potentially a 20% historical decline. The water fund, while consumption may be acceptable, usages could also decline related to business closures. The equipment replacement fund sees adequate reserves, but we've reduced the transfers from the general fund, skipping them. One thing we haven't discussed at length is pension funds, and those assets will be significantly affected by the market forces. However, they are amortized over a 5-year period, so we'll see some smoothing effect to those losses, as well as with IMRF, whose rates will probably change in 2 fiscal years. So general fund balances. The estimated FY20 projected fund balance includes the reversal of the $410,000 interfund transfer to the replacement fund. And without this change, the fund balance percentage of operation would be about 77.6%. So FY19's audited year-end balance number was 76.4, with the reductions of expenditures from the transfers were at 86.1 estimated for year-end FY20. What does that look like going forward? So the original projection in the first budget, changes that were made and approved with the biannual budget at the end of April, brings us to approximately a 62% fund balance. That includes a $410,000 reduction. So with the updated versions and the potential deferrals that we included in the memorandum, that could bring us to 60.1%. I wanted to also take a look at what would happen if we included certain capital projects back into the expenditures, particularly the one that's been discussed earlier. That could bring the fund balance number to 57.3. And lastly, I wanted to take a look at the out years, just to show you that these are some serious decisions that need to be made, and the updated projections for fiscal year 22. If revenues bounce back to the same level that they were in FY20 prior to the COVID, so that would be a 4.5% increase from FY22. And we do the same interfund transfers, and expenditures just have a 3% increase, which is normal due to business process. And we continue with the interfund transfers to the replacement fund, and an additional potential $100,000 for pension costs. And we continue with the $500,000 capital as discussed earlier, and complete the capital projects that were deferred. We'd be looking at a 33% fund balance. Then lastly, just to give a perspective of the decline, do you want me to just give you a line chart? So it shows FY19, FY20 estimated year end, FY21 the first projection, FY22 with the second deferrals and amendments, and potentially where we could end up at FY22.
Can I just jump in with a quick question?
Sure.
You had talked about year to year an increase of 4.5% expected of revenues. Is that basing the increase, right? So the $10 million in revenue that you show.
So that 4.5% increase is the amount of increase we would need to bring us back to pre-COVID levels.
That's what I was gonna say. Is this an increase of 4.5% based on a starting point that's very low, like a COVID load type number, or
it's to bring us back to approximately this FY20 number of 10,000,007. So it would bring us to approximately 10-12.
So we were talking about the Boardman Court project being about 270,000.
Right.
What is the number that gets it from 30-something% to at least 50%, which is what our stated goal is? What number of dollars would get us to 50% in terms of
so this last slide that I gave you as a third version that was not included in the packet.
Oh, okay.
Includes the Boardman Court expense in capital, and brings us to this estimated 57.3%.
But that's not moving forward out to 2022 when it hits the critical point, right?
Right. 2022 includes, sorry, I'm switching quickly, includes the expenses on this screen and moves us forward, assuming that we have the same expenses as and project philosophies as we did in the past.
Mhm. I guess I'm a little confused because I thought that pre-COVID, we would have been in the 50% range. So the only thing that's different in this scenario where we end up at 33.2% is that I guess it's a couple more years of slowly rebounding from lost
Right.
revenues, right?
So the percentage and the fund balance numbers are calculated based off the year-end balance from the prior years. So
Right,
as
right.
that number accumulates and reduces, it's going to have, you know, a net effect on where we end up.
So it's showing a rebounding of the revenues that looks, how slowly does that rebound? You know, here we are at the 10 million, which is where we would have been, but how long does it take us to get there in your projection?
So
I don't
that's
know.
really a shot in the dark.
Yeah, I know that.
We've really only looked, this was my just scenario that I wanted to propose to you so you could see where we could end up if we continue with the projects that we had and all the expenses that we had prior to looking at budget reductions.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people that speculate there'll be a flat, you know, recovery, that it will not rebound as quickly as anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
So the projection that we see here is the impact on at the end of the 21-22 fiscal year, and it should, the capital expenditures on this projection assume, of course, that we had not spent the money in that those are the capital expenditures that we're putting off.
Right.
Correct?
Yes.
And we're dropping them into a future year.
Right. And by capital expenditures, that would also include road replacement, which is an annual cost that makes up anywhere from $500,000 to $700,000 of that number already. So if you look at that, we're not really projecting a lot of additional capital in that number.
Right. And the difference, I mean, if you just look at the projected fund balance of 3.6 million, just, you know, quick and dirty numbers, we need to be at 5 million to be at 50%. So we're 1.4 million short of where we would like to be at 50%.
Right. And like I said, this is just a projection. It could change.
Mm-hmm.
It's just to, you know, present a potential decline.
Mm-hmm.
A question for Drew, or indeed for anybody else who knows the answer. If what is presented on page 13 with a fund balance at 33.2% in fact comes to pass, what kind of situation does that place us in to be able to take advantage of monies that will be available to pay our part when monies are available for the Green Bay Road project? Maybe state it more simply, how does this put us instead for the Green Bay Road project?
So, Bettina, the capital outlay there assumes that those capital initiatives would go on as we discussed, correct?
So this is general fund balance projections, and the Green Bay Road project is out of the capital fund. So we haven't really looked at how the capital fund would be affected by not making that transfer this current year that we chose to remove, and how Green Bay Road will get funded. I mean, to be honest, we haven't looked at that.
Yeah, so, okay, but let me do this too. Jeff, would you talk about, to help maybe answer this question too, about how clear is our picture for whether or not we're going to get the nod from the Council of Mayors to get the 80/20 funds, and what's the right timeline that we should be assuming for that? Jeff, can you help us with that?
Yeah, our application for funding went in April, and we should have some idea where we rank within a month or a month and a half from now. Final grading, I don't think it's going to come out until August or September. But there were projects that were approved in prior years that weren't finished for one reason or another. I think it's usually land acquisition in other communities. Those were determined by the Council of Mayors to be first in line for funding. If they all go, that's going to fill up the funding pot for this 2-year cycle. But they've been delayed in some cases for 10 years. So I'm not sure how ready those projects are. So Green Bay Road will not happen next year. I think the earliest it will happen is 2022, but we'll have a much better idea in probably 2 to 3 months as far as if 2022 is realistic or if it's going to be further out.
I guess I have a related question. Are we at risk of losing any grant funding if we delay any of these projects that are on the list?
No, the grant funded projects we have are the Green Bay Road Bridge. The engineering is 80-20 right now with IDOT. So we're planning on moving forward on that. The McClory pedestrian bridge, we have a IGA with the county to split some costs and a grant. I think that was also going to continue. And Green Bay Road, if we get funding, it sounds like it's still in the plan to pay for it with that fund balance that you just saw. So those things that we're not planning on delaying.
No, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the bike path lighting, wasn't there a grant for that? Or maybe
We implied we're not successful in securing one.
Okay, thank you.
So with respect to Green Bay Road, if the money came through and we were not in a position to match it, are we in the same situation that those other communities are in today, where they are not quite ready to advance their project, but the money has been, for lack of a better word, earmarked or prioritized for them? Would we be in a similar situation?
If we get in the funding schedule, there are deadlines that need to be met as far as putting it out for bids. And if you don't meet that deadline, you risk your funding.
Well, the capital, I don't think that we've looked at what the capital fund is going to look like year to year, given, you know, what was originally in the budget. But it sounds like 2023 might be the earliest that the village might be needing cash for that construction, and that would be 185,000. Is that it, right? Is that?
No, it would be significantly more than that. It would be, you say 23, it'd be fiscal year 23, but that'd be the summer of 22. We could be doing that project. Our total outlay on that is, I think, 1.2 million with the bridge and the road. That is our 20%.
What is our capital fund balance as of today?
Let me stop sharing. Sorry. I'll let you know.
Sure. We've got, you know, in theory, that fund started at a level of $2 million for, you know, the funding of larger capital items. And I just wanted to see where we were on that. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Maybe we ought to.
No, it's okay.
Okay, I was going to say, go ahead.
It's okay. Yeah.
If you'll need a few minutes, we could perhaps maybe take a look at the project list while you do that. I think that was the red light, yellow light, green light analogy that Drew talked about, where the projects were reviewed. For what public works.
In answer to your question quickly, Barbara, the FY20 estimated year-end fund balance is 429. And based on budget requests for 21, we'd be in the 279 mark. And then 22 is where we needed to determine how we were going to come up with extra funding for the Green Bay Road project.
I see. So right now it shows a negative balance.
Well, forecasting out, but I mean, right now we're at about 429. And we eliminated this $500,000 transfer and just pushed it down to 50,000 to cover expenses for that year. And had that have continued, the number would, be different.
One of the things that the Village Finance Committee has looked at in the past is the investment that the village has historically made in capital, and it's very greatly depends on if the village issued debt, if the village, saved up, MFT fund over a period of time and did, a significant chunk of roads at once. But the ebb and flow, there has certainly been times when the village has been very slow or unable to, or chose not to invest in capital over multiple years.
So if I could just add one comment though, Drew, that the extra money that is coming from that Illinois Bonds Act, while they've allocated it to municipalities with the same math as the MFT fund allocations, it cannot be spent as MFT money. It has some guidelines and it needs to be spent on capital projects not related to roads or existing replacements or maintenance problems. So a project like Green Bay Road, from what I've read of that bond money, looks like it would qualify. So we're getting about $360,000 over the course of 6 payments, which started we just got one already. So we got about $62,000. So if that money is just kind of accrued and held on the side, that could certainly offset some of those costs. It's not a small number.
That's right. But that's also dependent on the state being able to issue debt, right?
Right.
And continue to borrow. And the engineer that I spoke to did agree that those monies could be used towards Green Bay Road recon, because it's not, you can't use it just to resurface roads like you normally can with MFT money. It's kind of handcuffed. But where I was going was that over the years, the village has probably had on average for a number of years only about $250,000 of discretionary money to spend on capital. That number has changed markedly in the last few years due to the village's success, and land use planning has resulted in greater sales tax revenues due to the target revenues and the other projects the village has done in terms of economic development with car dealerships that have generated significant revenues that we've been able to reinvest in all the assets. Obviously, the COVID situation has interrupted that, right? So if you want, I can quickly brush through these projects, or you're certainly welcome to.
I would welcome you walking through the items that have been green lighted first, and then talking about the yellow and red.
Yeah, so the sidewalk replacement, the street rehab, non-MFT, those first few items have been green lighted. The board's approved. We talked about that when the board approved those, just at the same time it was approving the budget, that those were going to be green lighted, and that work is underway as we speak. Pavements, maintenance, crack sealing, that's a number that we have said it's nice to spend it, but it's not requirement. Yes, it does help our pavement to make that type of minor, whether it be crack sealing or whatever to the pavement, non-resurfacing work, does extend the life of the pavement, but if we don't do it a year, it's not going to kill us. The Glen footbridge repairs, those are, I think Jeff and I were talking about this. This is a project that we could take on some of this ourselves, some minor repairs. At the same time, this may be a project that we look to do ourselves with the idea that maybe there's funding for a bigger project like redoing the entire bridge through a grant program in the future, rather than investing a lot in some significant repairs. Did I misrepresent that, Jeff?
No, I'd say that's accurate. It won't last forever. So we will need to do some work in the next probably 3 years on it.
Yeah. The bike path lighting, that's one of those where I think people would view that as a want and not a need. It'd be nice to have it. It's been talked about doing. It's been in the works for a very long time, but it's one of those, it's an amenity to a section that would make it improve safety and a number of other elements, but not a must. This is the Underpass Ted Bridge. So that's this Sheridan Road bike pedway along the McClory Trail, replacing that existing 6 foot bridge with a newer, is it 14 feet, Jeff?
It's 8 plus some shoulders. I think it's 12 overall.
12. Okay, so 12-foot wide.
I'm sorry, no, it is 14. It's 10 plus 2 foot shoulders. It's 14. You're right.
All right, great. I was right. 14-foot wide bridge. But this is one of those that this is a project that's involving the county and the state who are jointly funding it. This is one it'd be nice to punt, but unfortunately, we had a chunk fall off last year, and this is one that we want to take care of now because we're concerned about it, the structural health of it. The underpass handrails, those rails are continuing to deteriorate, but they still function. They're not attractive. They're rusted out really bad in certain areas, but this is one that we could punt. Jumping down to number 11, the storm sewer improvements. Jeff, do you want to talk about that? Well, I'll do it. So this is money to try to solve small neighborhood problems here and there. So there's projects that pop up that may not be, it's a way for us to invest in infrastructure in the neighborhood, maybe add in an inlet here and there, or do some other things to improve stormwater flow in certain areas, but it's not a major project. And sometimes this gets wrapped into road resurfacing work or other situations, but it's just a little money for the village engineer to help solve neighborhood problems. Jeff, and this year you've got that slated for what? How is that spoken for?
It's not all spoken for yet. There's a few areas where we have our repetitive icing problems in winter because somebody has a sump pump or a drain that kind of dumps into the street, and we can probably just put an inlet in there, grab that water before it ends up in the street. So there are, I see them as public safety issues in the winter, and there's a line that's longer than $25,000 for that. So there's a few spots that we can take care of with that money, but not all of them.
So let's talk about Boardman Court. Jeff, I'm going to turn this over to you. This is a project that's been planned, designed, and is very close to being bid, but this is a very large ticket item. And Jeff, would you talk about, I know you've been revisiting this with the consulting engineers and talking about, could you share with the finance committee and the balance of the board members the scope of this project? What's the anticipated level of improvement? And what would the neighborhood expect to this improvement to solve?
Yeah, so existing condition right now, there is a dip in the road on Bath and Tennis Club Road. It's about 300 feet east of Green Bay Road. And when that dip overflows, it goes into Jeff and Michelle White's yard and goes around their house and sometimes gets their basement wet. The original plan for that subdivision, that house was going to be much higher, and that water was going to keep running north into the railroad tracks. And I do not know why, but in the 80s, that house was built much lower. And now it almost forms like a moat around their house when the road overflows. That area takes water all the way from Lake Forest, the first lot in to Lake Forest in the south, and then the backyards of Green Bay Road and Forest Hills Road. They are traveling north. They go into the street. The storm sewer is too small. It goes over the curb and into the White's yard. Right now, it's about a 1-year storm where it starts overtopping into the White's yard. So we looked at a ton of different things. I first met with the Whites back in 2017, and we were trying to find options. She said before it wasn't an easy problem to solve, and it's not. And the solution we have is a bit of a compromise, but it's to essentially increase the storm sewer on a portion of Bath and Tennis Club Road to catch more of that water before it ends up dumping into their yard. So it is sized per our village criteria so that the 10-year storm will go in that pipe. And that's meets our criteria. It also does mean during larger storms, it still will overtop the curb and end up in the White's yard. It shouldn't get as much up to their window wells as it does now. But there is a limit to the effectiveness of any straight storm sewer solution with a pipe. But our proposal is just to increase the size of the pipe headed east down Bath and Tennis Club Road As you get down to the intersection where it ends into Wimbledon Court and Wimbledon Road, it would actually plug back into a smaller storm sewer, and then that water would come up on the street and then go into the wetland. We're looking at running the larger pipe all the way into the wetland, the Getz wetland, Drew?
Yes.
Across from Clay Court.
Yeah.
That was about $500,000. So in analyzing this, kind of, like I said, it's kind of a compromise solution that lets the water go back into the street, but it's not going to go in any homes. It should run harmlessly down the street into the wetland anyway. So that is what our project is. It's just about ready to bid. We just have to, put the dates on it, and it would be out for bids.
Just a quick question. I think there was some discussion about if more than one homeowner was affected. When I looked at the video, it truly showed a deep moat-like bunch of water around the home, and I didn't know if that was exclusive to the Whites or there were other homes that were overwhelmed as well.
The home to the north of the Whites, I believe, took on some water during the 2017 storm. I think it was just that event that it might have gotten that high. Our modeling doesn't show their house taking water. There is an issue when that moat goes around the White's house. It ends up to a pipe that also drains a portion of the other property's yard. So that may have overwhelmed that pipe at that time. But I think generally speaking, we don't design things to the 2017 storm. So up to the design storm, I think it is just the Whites that flood.
Jeff, in your opinion, the storm that we had last week, I assume that's where the video is from that we were sent. If we did this improvement, would that have solved that problem? I haven't heard if that was a 10-year storm that we had last week or what?
No, it was like a 2-year storm. They changed the storms a few months ago, so our scales are all a little off right now. But even the old storms, we didn't get more than a 5-year storm. Like I said, I think before just at the 1-year storm is where it tips over the street right now. If the improvements are installed, it'll be a 10-year storm before they start tipping over the curb and going into the White's yard.
One engineering question, and I, perhaps I'm a little confused here, but I know at one point you said that the Boardman Court project ultimately moves into a smaller pipe, and that the alternative of having a larger pipe would cost $500,000. Under ordinary bottleneck theory, how is it that this project would be effective really at all if it goes from a larger pipe ultimately downstream, not very far, into a smaller pipe? And my question is directed at making sure that if we spend this money, it will have the positive effect desired.
And I understand that the dip in the road, so it goes from Green Bay Road, it goes down the hill to this low spot, then it goes back up about to the intersection of Boardman and Bath and Tennis. And then Bath and Tennis goes downhill, it's probably 8 more feet as you get towards the end of the street. So where the bottleneck is, where the larger pipe meets the smaller pipe, water will stop there, it will come up through the inlet grate and into the street. But at that point in the street, it's not going to cause any property damage. The street continues to flow downhill and then around the corner into the wetland. So we've kind of safely moved it past the spot where it will dump in the White's yard to a spot where it's going to stay in village right away on the street and then get into the wetland reserve. We have a plan, if the rest of that pipe ever needs replacing, we'll upsize it to the larger pipe. But we don't need to do that now to meet our standard to help out the area up closer to Boardman Court.
Okay, so I generally understand this. Where it meets the smaller pipe, it has other means of outlet, which will still provide relief that is desired for this project.
That is correct.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And Jeff, to be clear on the village's standards that we're trying to achieve historically with any stormwater project, could you remind the board of those and how this fits in with that, just to clarify?
Yes, we want to have all the storm sewers sized so our streets are not ponding water during up to the 10-year storm, and that homes aren't taking in water at the 100-year storm. With the new 100-year storm, the White's home would take water.
With
old
this solution.
ones, with our modeling, yes. With this solution, it will not take water. The existing conditions right now, with the larger 100-year storm, it does show water going over their window wells. So this would rectify the standard in both those cases, the water over their window wells and the water in the street during the 10-year storm.
Okay.
Just had a
Well,
question.
Can I-
Go ahead, Joy. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I just wanted to follow up on Bill's question, Jeff. So we moved the water further east down the street and then the inlet overflows. How flooded will the street be then? I thought we were always trying to
It'll just
keep
be
water off the streets.
Yeah, it'll be passable. It'll be a couple inches as it flows down the street. This is not, there's not another
It's not pooling.
dip in the road down there that will hold water. It will
Yeah.
just flow. So it should
Okay,
be a
okay,
couple inches in the gutters and then make its way into the wetland.
okay. Thank
It
you.
moves about 100 feet north and then moves into the wetland, I would guess.
Yep.
My question is with regard to the timing of this project. If this project were to be done in this year, I would imagine there's a timeline start to finish, like it might take 4 months or 2 months start to finish. So this would be a project that we couldn't start it in October. We couldn't start it, at some late period in time. What does the time frame look like for kind of making the decision on this? Because we'd like to wait and see on everything, but it's not always possible given the nature of the project.
So the hard end of the season is when the asphalt plant's closed. This will need street repaving where the pipe's going to go, and that is roughly Thanksgiving. It's probably a month of work, about a month to get the contractor, after he signed a contract to start, and probably a month to get it out, to have the bid and the contract awarded. So 3 months, I think, is the smallest time frame you can do. The more time you give a contractor to fit in his schedule, the more likely you are to get a little better bid, get more interest in it. So without this current situation, the plan was to put it out for bids in May and then, give them till November to finish and let the contractor, pick whatever month worked the best for him to do the construction to try to get the best bid. So like I said, you can do it in 3 months. You just might pay a little premium for tightening it that far. 4 or 5 months is probably where you want to be, which means it would go out for bid pretty soon.
Right.
Ideal world.
So if everything were ideal, the latest you could put it out to bid would be July, and we know that nothing is ideal, especially in this current economic situation. So thank you for that. And Drew, we kind of sidetracked, going through the Boardman Court issues, and I know we want to quickly go through the rest of it, but I don't want to cut anybody off if there's Boardman Court related comments.
So, go ahead.
Are there other people who would like to speak with regard to this project?
I just had one final question for Jeff. In some of the other projects that we've done in the past, it's been specific to one property, but there's been other benefits to kind of the surrounding neighborhood. Is there anything like that with this, or is it truly just the one home that's affected and will benefit the one homeowner?
Yeah, I think in this case, it probably is mostly the one home. The street, I don't recall it being closed just because the water ponds over the curb, which is only 3 or 4 inches in this case. It just dumps in their yard, so it doesn't let it get deep enough to close the street. The neighbor to the north, like I said, I don't think they flood during any of our design storms, so I wouldn't see them as a direct benefactor of this. I think it is mostly just the one property right now.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
And I had one last question. Just, is there anything in between, like $0 and $272,000? I'm sure you've exhausted all possibilities, but is there anything we could do at a lesser amount that might help them? It wouldn't necessarily completely fix the problem, but could help them until we could go in and do the full project?
We designed the project to meet our standards. we could compromise our standards and make the pipe smaller, but I think we've already compromised, like I said, going all the way to the wetland was
Right.
I think it was 470,000 to make this a little more palatable. And, you know, you can't really make the project a shorter limit because then you're not going to get it far enough away to prevent further property damage. So I guess I don't really see a way to do that. We looked at some other options originally. None of them seemed to work out.
Okay, thanks.
Chair Inkerman, if it's all right with you,
Yes.
looking at the time,
Yes.
here's a possible suggestion, and you all can tell me if you like this idea. So, if possible, I'd like to go through the list of these projects quickly,
Yes.
and then I know the village board will have a meeting as early as June 8th, and so that's about a week and a half away. So the idea of having this conversation continued as another finance committee meeting on the 8th to have this conversation to continue. And one thing I will tell you is that Bettina and I were talking earlier, and she is exploring the possibility of finding some additional money to try to find a way to make Boardman more fundable, more actionable, but she wants to explore that. So I know she wants some more time to do that, right, Bettina?
I do.
Yeah, and so that way, I know the Whites are kind of waiting on pins and needles here to see what happens, but I think maybe there might be a better answer that they might like better. Again, if the board chooses to fund this, there may be a way to do it. We may have different information than we have right now.
Got it.
With
Okay.
with a creative way to finance it, but if that's all right, I'll go through the rest of these items.
Thank you.
So the next item up would be the village-wide storm sewer model, and that's a bit of a misnomer. That's really, there was $10,000 in the plan to use Christopher Burke Engineering, the village's consultant on stormwater, to help educate all of us on creating a stormwater utility feed, because knowing that there's countless stormwater projects out there, and that unlike the water fund or some other utilities, there's not a direct revenue stream dedicated to this, and to maybe identify one, which is a common practice in municipalities. So that was the purpose of that. And that's, but again, it's one of those where it could wait. So that's what we elected to do, or in terms of our recommendation. The next item was the Lakeland / Forest Cove lift station. If you notice, this is not a full green. This is a stale green light. This is one of those where the numbers, the original number in the budget was originally thought that we could cover both projects. It's actually only enough to cover one of the projects. At this point, I think Jake would have a mutiny on me if I chose, if that was on the list, to get rid of the Lakeland project or to punt it for a year. This is a sanitary sewer improvement to a lift station that, if we don't take action in Jake's eyes now, then we may have sewage backing up in homes, and resulting in us incurring a significant overtime cost to go out there and repair and really limp along a pump station that's in the need of replacement. I think the good news is the way this projects work is there's a small universe of bidders on projects like this. We may be able to find $30,000. It just all depends on how the bids come in, right, Jeff?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. The street rehab money, that's already been authorized, the $550,000. I'll skip over the water fund project. That's a separate fund, different revenue stream than the general fund and the other capital. So I'll skip those. Again, those were again all green lighted, given that was the money the village borrowed to take on a lot of those projects. I get to item number 28, the Green Bay Road recon and the Green Bay Road Bridge. Jeff, you talked about this a little bit. These dollars that we're looking to hold off on are largely due to the phasing. Can you kind of just touch on that really quickly?
The road reconstruction, we can sit for this fiscal year without putting it more behind schedule as we wait for the funding decision. The bridge, that 75,000, we'd like to continue on. I see it read there, but you know that does get reimbursed to us at 80%. but to try to keep those schedules together, so hopefully we can do the projects at the same time. Like I said, I wanted to move forward with the bridge money.
But it's showing as red. So again, that's one of those, it's like tough decisions.
Pink.
Yeah, pink. Green Bay Road, West Washington Ped Crossing, that was a project that we looked at to explore. There was $10,000 set aside for that. That's a new project, it's brand new on the radar. I say that, it's been talked about for years, but actually coming into the budget, that's the one we would look to punt. Moffett Road Culvert, that is, money's already spent, right, Jeff?
We're just waiting for the bills from IDOT. It could take a long time.
Yeah, and that's the list.
Got it.
Okay, I'd like to, not on the list, and technically, it's theoretically not our problem because it's the park district that owns and controls the beach and the bluff. However, in the eyes of the community, our beach and bluff are our most significant asset that we have. It is coming to crunch time at some point relatively soon. And the involvement of the village right now is a big question mark. What's it going to cost? Are we going to be able to do anything? What's the park district going to do? But the significant erosion that is occurring cannot be put off too long. So how much the village is involved, if the village is involved, really, as we look at all of these improvements and needs, we can't ignore that either. So we have to kind of keep that in the mix to talk about. And I think, Drew, you don't need to show it now, but I would like you to send everybody the photo that was taken of the house at the end of Mountain and Sunrise, which last Sunday lost a significant portion of their land facing the lake. They lost their whole terrace area there. So would you mind sending that to us later tonight?
I'd be happy to do that.
Howard, thank you. Okay, I don't want to belabor it now, but I think we need, as we discuss and move on, we need to keep that in the mix.
So do we have a motion then to continue the discussion regarding the revenue and expense modifications to the next regularly scheduled Finance Committee meeting, most likely on the same day as the next village board meeting?
So moved.
Second.
May we have a roll call, please?
Chair Inkerman,
Aye.
Member Toll,
Aye.
Member Meyer.
Aye.
Thank you.
And finally, it seems like this discussion is not being given due time and that we have about 3 minutes left. It's a discussion regarding a plan for
You're muted.
Construction escrows and bonds. And do we want to give a Reader's Digest of what that is, or do we need to just at this point in time push that to the next Finance Committee meeting? I just think it might be worth to do a Reader's Digest because it is a source of potential funding, and we're talking about this, and I wanted to kind of plant a seed if we had the ability.
Yeah, I think everybody had a chance to read the memorandum. I hope. It seems like it's not an uncommon problem to have, but many communities collect bonds and hold money, security, if you will, to ensure that the work is completed and the village's parkways or projects are completed pursuant to approved plans. As it turns out, some people don't choose to close out projects for whatever reason. And so monies sit on our books for extended period of time. And so we would just, we were reviewing this and it became apparent that it's better to address this now and rather than later and just start clearing these things off our books. And yes, it could be a potential revenue to the village. But the idea, I think the general goal was to try to return money to people. We're not there to try to, this is not a sweep of funds. The goal is to return these monies back to anybody and everybody we can who put money down, as part of an improvement and for whatever reason chose not to come back and collect it or ever follow up on it.
So you will be contacting the individuals or companies that put monies out there for the bonds, and then should they not respond, you have a next step, a plan.
Yeah, we would try 3 times is like the minimum we would lay out to try to reach out to folks. And given the time that could have transpired for some of these, these people could be, the owners could have long moved, construction companies could have gone out of business. And to be honest, our records are not great going years back to identify who actually put the money down. We will attempt, make rational attempts. And I think this is a situation where if somebody came back years later and said, oh, you swept my money 5 years ago, I think the village would be inclined just to return the money. I mean, I think our goal is to keep the money. I think our money is just to clear our books and clear our network of these outstanding issues.
And so would that be something that we would attempt to resolve before the end of the fiscal year? So give a year time frame or sooner than that?
No, Glen was the person who had chiefly researched this with our intern and Bettina. And the idea is, I think they felt like, 90 to 120 days, we can get this done and start the process and get some results and find out what's available. But again, I certainly wouldn't view this as here comes, a revenue stream that we weren't accounting for it. I mean, it could be real money, but it's one of those we won't know until we get to the end of it. And again, if our principal goal is to not keep it, rather not count those chickens before they're hatched.
That's right. So do we have any comments or questions from anyone on the board?
No.
Okay, hearing none, do we want to recommend bringing this before the board at the next board meeting? Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Chair Ankerman,
Aye.
Member Meyer,
Aye.
Member Toll.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have a motion to adjourn?
Just to clarify, I didn't know if the Whites had any other comments to make who are on this call, and some others have joined this call since.
I apologize.
Yep. No one has their hand raised, but I'm putting it out there. Glenn, could you remind folks how to participate if they so desire for this Finance Committee meeting before it closes?
Certainly. So if you are dialing in by phone, it doesn't look like anyone is. You can dial *9. If you want to use the Q&A button down at the bottom, you can ask to be recognized. You can talk for a little bit.
And just one more note, if persons are on this call already for the next call, which is the the village board meeting, we'll roll into that immediately if your intentions are to speak on that call. I think we're good.
Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn the Finance Committee meeting?
So moved.
Second.
And do we need a roll call?
Not for that. You can just say all in favor.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting is closed. Thank you.
Okay, are we staying on for the next meeting here?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What time is, oops, we're after the hour. Is everybody ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, let's get into that and welcome everybody to the May 27th Village of Lake Bluff Board of Trustees meeting. Could we have a roll call, please?
Trustee Ankerman,
Here.
Trustee Charlo,
You're on mute.
Trustee Dewart,
Here.
Trustee Markey,
You on mute?
I don't see her.
We lost her.
Okay, all right.
Trustee Toll,
Here.
Hopefully she'll pop up in a minute. All right, we do have the consideration of the Pledge of Allegiance. And if everyone would please stand or for the pledge, that would be great. Pledge allegiance to the flag
Flag
of the
of the United States
of America.
the
to
republic
Republic
for
which
which it
stands,
stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty,
With liberty and
and
justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, we have consideration of the minutes of the May 11th, 2020 Village Board meeting. Do I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
So moved. Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second by Mr. Toll. Are there any additions, corrections to this? All right, roll call, please.
Trustee Ankerman,
Aye.
Trustee Sherlow,
Aye.
Trustee Dewart,
Aye.
Trustee Markey, Trustee Meyer,
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
All right.
Okay, Trustee Markey is still not with us.
Ma'am.
She'll be back in a minute. I want to check on that. Thank you. Village Board President set aside 15 minutes for any member of the audience or community who might like to speak on an item that is not on tonight's agenda. Do we have anybody that would like to do so? Okay, Glenn, do we have anybody?
Yes, ma'am, we do.
All right, would they just speak up and say their name and let us know what they would like to talk about?
Jim Newton, we're recognizing you. You have to unmute your mic.
Can everyone hear? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I'm just dialing in to inquire what the long-term plans are to fix the flooding on Pine Court. I sent everyone an email over the last week, and on let's see, the day May 17th, they experienced a major flood. I've only lived on the property now for about a year, and the street has completely flooded about 4 times. The flood on May 17th was particularly bad as the water got within feet of my house. And so, I know that there's been some planning around this issue, so I'm wondering what the time frame is for fixing, general flooding in the East Terrace neighborhood.
All right, thank you for that. All right. Generally, we don't normally respond. Usually it's for comments, but Drew, do you have anything that you might want to update us on?
Yeah, I'll do a quick one, and then I'll ask if it's all right with you, Village Engineer Hanson, to comment too. But
okay.
Hey, Jim, this is Drew. I think I responded to your email.
Yes. Hi, Drew.
Hey, how are you? The answer is the village has done a significant, we've done stormwater modeling for the entire village. And as part of that, we've identified a number of areas where stormwater infrastructure is inadequate to satisfy and really deal with the current storms that we're seeing. And Village Engineer Hanser talked about this early in the earlier meeting of the Finance Committee about how what's a 10-year and 100-year storm event has dramatically changed very recently. But the village has been working to identify solutions in a number of areas, including the East Terrace, to meet our standards of making sure that roadways are passable up into a 10-year event and that homes are not taking in water at a 100-year event. And obviously the East Terrace is in a situation now with the new standards that the pipes clearly don't satisfy the need. And the solutions to increase the pipe capacity has been prepared. A very general plan has been designed with estimates in the neighborhood of $5 million to do that project. If you heard any of the call earlier, the village is not in a position to finance that project of that scope and scale at this time, or in the immediate future, but has continued to explore what other options exist. In fact, tomorrow, myself, the village engineer, Jeff Hansen, and our consultant from Christopher Burke Engineering, Scott Griffith, which also happens to be a Lake Bluff resident, we're going to walk a overland flow route that is another alternative that could be significantly less financial dollars that would achieve all the objectives that I just described in terms of stormwater standards to meet. It's not a pipe solution, so that means water would be flowing over land, in between homes, around, wiggling through backyards in areas that are already low spots, but it would be designed in such a way that water would move through them and not stay static for extended periods of time at all. But again, this is a project that I think the village has. It's a new solution. It is, I would say, extremely difficult to execute because it would require an exceptional amount of cooperation with the neighborhood. But persons like yourself that appear to be very motivated to try to solve the problem in a way that can be done, potentially done a lot faster than a $5 million solution. And again, that $5 million solution would end up dumping water all in the viaduct and aggravating a situation we already know is a problem. But nonetheless, this solution would do the same, but a lot less expensive. But those are kind of the projects that have been talked about and are currently being explored. Again, earlier in the phone call, the village was looking to investigate the planning to possibly institute a new utility tax for stormwater. Stormwater, unlike water fund or a sand sewer, where it has a service fee associated with it, there's no revenue stream apparently directly linked to stormwater, and a lot of communities have come up with systems to try to manage that by creating fee structures around impervious surface, which is a key contributor to creation of stormwater. Jeff, do you want to talk a little more detail about the pipe solution and the overland flow as far as East Terrace, and maybe some ideas about those, if there is a timeline? And I'll say there really isn't. So really, can you maybe just describe those projects really a little better than I did?
Yeah, well, there's the East Terrace has a low spot, maybe 4 to 6 lots, properties south of West Center Avenue on all of its street, from Pine to Lincoln to Rockland to Malman, and each one of those spots holds water when it rains. Our study bore that out. And there's 2 ways to drain water. One is overland and one is in a pipe. And the pipe is expensive. To run bigger fingers of our pipe, our main is on West Center, down each of these side streets, and improve the pipe on West Center as well. That's why that number is so big, because you're essentially redoing the storm sewer for the entire half of that neighborhood. The other solution, if this was a subdivision built today, there would be defined swales going from west to east between homes to carry excess water when the streets were overtopping. Right now, Pine Court, like you said, it fills up at the low spot in Pine Court, fills up front yards. It eventually goes between a couple houses and kind of wiggles its way back, but there are other issues. I've met probably 15 or 20 different neighbors in that neighborhood in my 5 years about drainage problems and getting water in their basements. It's truly a neighborhood-wide problem. But to retrofit a overland flow path like we're talking about it's difficult because it has significant impacts on private property. A lot of those houses, garages are kind of built a little close together to fit what we would need to do, but we're gonna walk through the neighborhood, see if there is a solution that looks like the best fit, and try to figure out what that would cost to implement, and see if maybe the property owners are interested.
Thanks for those comments. I guess I would only add one other thing. So I've been looking at the model that was put together and presented to the board on the November 11th meeting, and looking at the 10-year and the projected 10-year and projected 100-year rainfall events. So the rain on the 17th or whenever, I've forgotten the date now, was modest compared to even the old 10-year standard. I think we got 1.4 inches of rain about in 2 hours. I think the current standard is a touch over 2 inches. And even then, we were seeing rain or filling of the basin that seemed to match closer to what is projected to be the 100-year rainfall. There was large overland flows coming down Green Bay Road all the way to Pine in front of my property. And then there's also several houses who've recently put in pumps to pump to the street. And according to at least the current model, there shouldn't be water back there, but obviously there is. So I was wondering, I know there was talk that some surveys were done in the past and when creating the model, but what are you going to do to ensure that, the model is actually accurately capturing all the rainflow or rainfall, excuse me?
Jeff, I know you know the answer to that.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure what you mean by the model, but our project only modeled larger pipes. It has an assumption in there that that water that you're referring to between Green Bay and Pine is making its way to Pine. The pump that you're talking about, that pumps out basically a lake in somebody's backyard. If they were not to pump that out, that lake would sit full, it would rain, all that water would just flow over land anyway. So we don't really feel that impacts Pine Court very much, but so that water is assumed to get to Pine Court in the models that we have done.
I guess my point is the lake doesn't appear to be in the model, in the spots that people are pumping out of. So I'm worried that the model is underrepresenting what the actual rainfall and flow is. So is there going to be any opportunity for public comment, later on as the model continues to be developed?
The model is pretty complete. We can talk tomorrow if you want to go more into detail on that. The model, like I said, assumes that all the water gets there, so it is kind of the worst case scenario model. It ignores small depressions and other little storage areas that may exist. So I feel like the model represents all that water getting there. I can talk to you more in the future about the process and how those models are developed.
Yeah, I'll follow up with an email. It's like I said, I've been looking at the model and it doesn't really seem to be matching up with the observations of people in the neighborhood. So we want to make sure that all the water is actually being, captured as the board continues to plan, different solutions.
Jim, and let me add this. Jeff, would you speak to like the next steps? Let's say that there's an overland flow route that makes sense that we think the neighborhood would consider. The next step we've talked about would be surveying work to get some real field data to help ensure that the thing will flow like we would anticipate, correct? In terms of collecting more data, and maybe that would help Mr. Newton's question.
That'd be like a parallel process to the pipes, which we already have kind of a solution for. Our first step is just to make sure that you don't have to buy several houses to put in the overland solution. So that's kind of the goal I have for tomorrow, and see what it would cost to develop some preliminary engineering, get some survey, and put a cost on what a project might be, and then start we have to approach property owners and then find out their interest as well.
Yeah, and the other thing I would offer to you, Jim, is that the village has installed 2 improvements, one in the North Terrace and one in the East Terrace, already based off those same models that have, and granted, we have not seen a storm like 2017, but in terms of functioning as designed and as spec'd, Jeff, how would you rate those improvements?
Oh, they work very well. I know Public Works is happy. We haven't had to close those streets that were normally on their hot list to get barricades out on. So it seems to be working very well.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, Jeff. And the one thing you have said is if we were to install pipes, that is very expensive, the water would go to the underpass. But you said that the overland movement of water would actually maybe work better. But one thing you haven't said is where is that water compared to the pipe if you use overland management?
I'm sorry, you said where does it go? Or I missed the very end.
I think you said that if you were to have to change a west center using pipes, the water would go toward the underpass. But if you use overland management, where is that water going?
Same destination.
Same destination.
Flows west to east through yards, a few hundred feet south of West Center. and then it gets down to Malman, and it gets routed into the park and behind, and it goes into the underpass, which is where the pipe goes right now. So it does end up in the same spot, which is the underpass.
What about, so the next street I think is Lincoln, right? North-south. You're not going to create an issue there as well?
Well, you'd have to work your solution kind of east to west so that you keep, you don't, if you make the swale just between Pine and Lincoln, then if you don't keep going east, then you have caused a problem on Lincoln. So you always have to start at Malman, work your way west so that you can always receive the water that you're dumping on the next street. It's going to be contiguous.
And but you would not be about to create an issue on Lincoln, right? Because I know that Lincoln had issues as well.
Yes, Lincoln and Rockland. Rockland is probably floods before Lincoln, but we'd have to take that solution all the way from Pine to Malman. It's not like the other project we talked about in finance where you can let the water out somewhere, in an intermediate point. You do this one, you'd have to get it all the way to the east through the subdivision. So you would need the cooperation of property owners on every block as you go east.
Thank you.
Jeff, just one more question, if I may. One of the other callers has posted a question asking about, one, making a statement that is a problem in the West Terrace also flooding, and asked if, is there a plan to do work in the West Terrace as well? Could you touch on that, please?
Our model isn't as developed in the West Terrace as far as plans to improve that storm sewer. We have a good handle on where it goes. I know that that system doesn't meet our new standards or our standards, but no, we don't have anything nearly as developed for the West Terrace at this point.
Right. Okay. Is anyone else wishing to make a comment? Okay, let's go back to the regular agenda. At this point, we're not going to change the order of the meeting as it's relatively short on the agendas what we have. We'll ask the village administrator for his report.
I will save all my comments for item 10, if that's all right with everybody. But happy to answer any questions.
Yes, item 10 is always good. Okay, village attorney's report. And I believe tonight you do have a report for us.
We're in historic times, so yes, I do have a report.
Well, this is historic, please.
So it's a procedural issue, but one you should all be aware of. When the General Assembly met over the last week in an abbreviated session, they did try to address how public bodies will have meetings going forward. As you know, right now, the reason we're able to have a remote public meeting is because the governor, in an executive order, suspended the requirement in the Open Meetings Act that at least 4 of you be physically present in order to have a meeting. We haven't had that requirement, so we've been able to do remote meetings. The governor's authority, as you may know, has been challenged in court, in several courts in Illinois. The General Assembly tried to memorialize what the governor did and amended the Open Meetings Act to add a new Section 7E, which basically says that public bodies can continue to meet or can meet without having a quorum physically present, without having anybody physically present, so long as certain conditions are met. The conditions are pretty much the conditions we've been operating under. So the governor has issued a disaster declaration. The one little additional requirement is that the village president would have to make a specific finding that it's not practical or prudent for a quorum to be physically present. The village president can do that without an emergency declaration. That can just be orally done at the beginning of the meeting. And I'll explain if and when we have to do that. The other change is that unless the governor does something, which I'll explain, it will be required when and if this law is signed, that at least one member of the public body or the village administrator or the village attorney be physically present at the village hall for the meeting. If the governor, in an executive order, which we think he will do, but we're not sure, says that it is unfeasible to have that requirement, then nobody has to be there, similar to what we're operating in now. So we have to wait and see what the governor does with regard to his next executive order, which we're expecting before the end of the week, because his current one expires at the end of the week. And he needs to issue a new one, of course, to implement phase 3 of the Restore Illinois plan, which everybody anticipates he will do before the end of the week. The new section also requires, as we've been doing, roll call votes on all votes. And it would mandate that the open session have a verbatim recording, which we do, but of course the statute right now only requires closed sessions to have verbatim recording. So all that said, we can continue to operate now as we've been operating. We don't know when the governor will sign this new bill. So we will let you know before the next meeting what rules we're operating under and if there are any changes that we need to make.
Okay.
Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for our attorney? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Steve, very much.
Thank you.
Peter? Okay, all right. We now have under the village president's report, extension of the village president's declaration of civil emergency. Of a consideration of a motion to extend that declaration. Do I have an approval for that motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Dewar. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second, Mr. Charlot. Thank you.
Oh, go ahead. You're going to read it. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I think, I think most of us know it, but there may be somebody out there who doesn't understand it, so I would like to read it. On March 18th, President O'Hara issued a declaration of emergency for the village of Lake Bluff related to the COVID-19 emergency. The declaration, among other things, provided that physical fitness facilities, membership sports, and recreational clubs must close. The village may enter into contracts for the emergency purchase of goods and services. The village administrator may implement emergency staffing protocols pursuant to the village's respective collective bargaining agreements, and directed village officials and employees to cooperate with other governmental agencies. Subsequently, the village president issued on April 23rd supplemental orders requiring the use of face coverings in the village. A similar requirement was imposed statewide on May 1st by order of the governor. The village president has the authority to issue the declaration and any or supplemental orders pursuant to the enabling provisions set forth in the Lake Bluff Municipal Code. In accordance with Illinois statutes, the village president's declaration lasts only for a period of 7 days, unless it is extended by action of the village board. At its March 18th, April 13th, April 27th, and May 11th meetings, the village board extended the declaration until the next subsequent village board meeting. Because the village board will meet next Wednesday, the declaration will expire at the end of that board meeting unless the board extends the duration of the declaration. The agenda for the board meetings have been prepared in a manner to allow the board, if it so desires, to extend the term of this declaration. The extension can be accompanied by a motion, a second, and a roll call vote. No written ordinance or resolution is necessary. If the village board desires to extend this declaration, the motion needs to include an expiration date. All right. All right, we recommend that this motion provide that we hereby move to extend the village president's March 18th, 2020 declaration of emergency until the end of the next regular, special, or emergency meeting of the village board, which at this time...
President O'Hara, I recommend that we modify my motion to include that verbiage.
All right, sir, thank you very much, and that would be until June 8th. Thank you. All right. Do we have any questions or concerns about that?
Yeah, President O'Hara, I do have a question. Are there any provisions in this emergency declaration that differ from the conditions that the state is contemplating opening up as part of phase 3 potentially on Friday?
That's a good point. I think in the original declaration, we did close physical fitness. other facilities, and now under the initiation beginning on May 29th for phase 3, there is some loosening of those restrictions by the governor. And it is believed that we are going to follow the recommendations of the governor. In his phase 3, he also put a provision in there that the local municipality may issue stricter regulations if it so desires. I do not at this point see the need to do so. I would like us to follow the governor's plan as we have done in the previous declarations, which has been successful. And I think that in a few minutes, Drew is going to talk about the opening of the restaurants and outside seating and how we're going to be doing that. Does that
Which
answer?
which also requires another supplemental order.
Yes,
So-
it will.
Well,
Okay.
And what President O'Hara just said, once we see the executive order from the governor, to the extent that the existing local declaration is more strict, there will have to be a supplemental order to make it consistent and not less strict than the governor's order.
Right. That's right. So that we will do modifications for that.
That can be done outside of a meeting. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes,
President can do that.
that could be done that. So as we mirror the new guidelines.
So for the public's benefit and for anyone, let's say, who's in a physical fitness facility, you would sign an amendment to your order upon the governor's action on the 29th.
Correct. And there are very specific guidelines for each of
Correct.
these institutions, which we would be expected that these institutions, in order to open, will follow.
Well,
Correct.
actually, and just to be crystal clear, there has been a previous order that Village President O'Hara issued, which had wiped those clean. That was done the last time to get in line with the governor's orders. So, as
True.
Village President O'Hara had mentioned, that we've been following in synchronicity with the governor's orders, with the only exception being with the initial order that required face coverings that were different and more restrictive than the governor's at the time because of the period of, I think it was 6 days where Village President O'Hara took effect before the governor's order required face coverings. So the other restrictions with respect to physical fitness facilities and businesses of that nature have actually been removed previously.
That's right, in the last one, yeah.
Yep. So
Okay. All right.
again, I guess the overlying Village President O'Hara's approach has been to let the governor's order dictate and not have any unique special restrictions. And the exceptions have been around liquor control.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just one more other item, if I may. One of our participants, attendees in the meeting rather, Susie McMurray, had a question, really a statement stating she's looking for clarity about her business, whether it can open or not. I'll read your statement. It says, I'm still not clear if I can open my business, Floatstone, by the governor's decree. I can. That's her. I will certainly follow up with her tomorrow about this.
Good. Please do.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Anyone else have a question about this? Okay. Roll call, please.
Trustee Sherlock.
Aye.
Trustee Dewart.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
Trustee Ankerman.
Aye.
All right. Item number 9 is the acceptance of the correspondence that was delivered to the Village Board of Trustees and the information reports on May 8th and May 15th. Do I have a motion to accept the correspondence?
So moved.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Marquis. And do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Toll. Any comments? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Dewart.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
Trustee Ankerman.
Aye.
Trustee Sherlock.
Aye.
Item number 10, which is a resolution providing village personnel direction to provide additional flexibility to food and beverage service establishments to facilitate outdoor service during the COVID-19 emergency. Do I have a motion to adopt this resolution?
So moved.
So moved. Thank you, Mr. Toll. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Byer. All right. While the governor's Restore Illinois plans originally anticipated that food and beverage service establishments could not return to on-premise services until at least June 26 during phase 4, the governor announced late last week that the food and beverage service establishment may provide limited outdoor on-premise services beginning as early as May 29th in phase 3. Consistent with the village's past practices and policies and the governor's objectives, the village can be creative and innovative in helping its food and beverage services establishment expand their options to conduct outdoor service in recognition of the challenges faced by food and beverage service establishments. It may be prudent and desirable to permit food and beverage establishments additional flexibility and not necessarily strictly enforce otherwise applicable provisions of the village code and zoning code to facilitate food and beverage service establishments to more easily provide outdoor service during the COVID-19 emergency. The village code provides that the village board must authorize the use of village streets and sidewalks for outdoor service if the use is anticipated to occur for more than 30 consecutive days. The attached resolution authorizes and directs village staff and the village administrator to permit food and beverage industries operate on village property pursuant to reasonable conditions for the next 90 days or until the governor authorizes food and beverage service establishments to resume indoor on-premise services. Drew, I'm going to ask you to kind of elaborate on this, if you will.
Yeah, and just to be clear, there's 7 different attachments to this cover memo. And it's a pretty thick one at that. But I would say really the only action that's required of the village board this evening is the resolution. Just want to clarify that, and that just paves the way. Ordinarily, I would have the authority for 30 days or fewer to grant use of the public way for outdoor dining and so forth. But because we're anticipating this situation lasting for longer than that, I wanted to get your approval now. And I will say that there's an exhibit number 7 that's attached to this report, which is a layout. That layout is what I would look to create and facilitate through the various agreements that are included in the packet that I would execute on behalf of the village within this authority, and to allow these types of restaurant and food beverage service on both public and private areas. The private areas, as you can see in the area, some of these restaurateurs have been able to negotiate with other private property owners to have food service and beverage service on these areas. The village would be looking to close a section of eastbound Scranton to create a footprint for restaurateurs to operate in, and likewise to take advantage of sidewalks for cafe service and areas where they can maintain a minimum of 10 feet of clear space for travel of pedestrians. So in some areas it will look like it has in the past, and other areas it will not.
Hey Drew, is it possible to, this is a great
exhibit.
Is it possible exhibit to get up on the screen so people can see this?
Yeah. Glenn, can you push that out there? But I'll keep talking.
Just one moment.
Yeah. So
thank you.
So the exhibit we're going to share, it'll highlight the areas, but this plan was created and this layout was created in cooperation in conjunction with the restaurateurs. So we met with them, we talked with them, we said, what do you need? What do you want? I think they have had, this is kind of a love-hate situation for them in that they have the ability to approach a little bit of normalcy again by having service areas for their patrons. The rub is it's limited to outdoor, and most of our restaurants in the village have really only public space to do this in, so their footprints are small. Some of the restaurants that are on the west side out like in Carriageway and those other areas, they have bigger footprints on private property where they can provide service, but a lot of our restaurants are located in our central business district where they're operating in a very limited footprint. But we talked to them about, do you want to use parking stalls? Largely the answer was no. That is because they have been morphing their businesses into predominantly takeout and pickup services. And so they didn't want to create those problems and those interfaces with a known service and a known way of operating that they've morphed into. They didn't want to disrupt that. And so this is the plan that we put together. I will say that it is based off what we know today. This is what we're going to do. I told the restaurateurs that I would be open to changing things based off what we see and how things function. They've indicated that there may be times where they want to close all of Scranton Avenue on a weekend. We have done that from time to time for block parties. So we may do that when the weather's looking like it's going to be perfect. We may go ahead and allow them to do that and let them spread out more to try to meet a bigger service area and to manage to satisfy all the guidelines from the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity and from the governor's office. But this is, I'll point out where you look at the area on the plan and the west side, very close to Sheridan Road, there's a red area labeled Donati's. If you look on the aerial photograph, there's a large truck park there. That is actually a loading and unloading zone for Block 1, a designated area as part of the development of that building. What Donati's is asking to do is to place a truck there that they could provide delivery to allow patrons to pick up pizza there and serve it and allow them to use that outdoor space there. This is one of those scenarios where I know the code precludes this. This is something that they approached and we talked about. I think this is something where we don't know what the future of restaurants is going to look like. It may include more outposts like this. So the idea of trying to be a little experimental and allowing some of these things to happen, again, this may be for 30 days if the governors, say for some reason they loosen up the regs sooner. But so we thought we use this as a bit of a test tube and do some experimenting and see what shakes out. But the goal is to try to create footprints where possible in the public way. And again, also where restaurateurs have been able to secure private land to facilitate this. We've got these agreements that are exhibits 2 and 3, where we will do conditions similar to what we've done in the past for other outdoor dining in terms of limiting the number of hours of operation, to standard times, to limit outdoor music as we've done in the past to certain times and limit amplification thereof, to account for, again, the governor's orders to ensure that, to the best of degree that we can help ensure public safety, obviously. Other limitations we've talked about is making sure that the restaurateurs are in charge of taking care of their own garbage and, again, making sure the area is keep being cleaned in a manner required under the code. Under the governor's requirements. Again, this is going to make sure that we cross our T's and dot our I's. It will require the village president to modify her order to allow outdoor service of alcohol in these areas for those businesses that have licenses and make sure that they comply with all those regulations. Also, it will require a communication. I'm sorry, that's what I was talking about. The liquor commissioner will have to grant the additional authority for the delivery of alcohol to these areas, as well as the supplemental order allowing the merchants to have these outdoor spaces, which were recently declared allowable under the switch in the governor's plan. I will say that we've had very limited conversations with some of the building owners along here. What I've asked the restaurateurs to do is, if they are attempting or wanting to have tables in front of other businesses along the sidewalk, is to get permission and show evidence of that from those businesses. So if they're going to be in front of their stores, like for example, if let's say Prairie Espresso wanted to expand its tables in front of the Lake Bluff hair salon there, Salon on the Bluff, they would have to get permission to put tables in front of that space. So we knew that people were comfortable with this. I have reached out to the owner of Block 1, who that property management lake effect, and trying to let them know that their block will continue to be impacted by this. The idea is to set up this area for outdoor dining there, to set it up and leave it in place 24/7 for the near future. And then the interruptions would be largely when the farmers market comes to town on Fridays. So the restaurants know they have to get out of there for that period of time. And we're going to give them a place to help round up and herd their outdoor dining equipment. I know the restaurants have been working hard. Thankfully, we have a very great esprit de corps with our restaurant groups. We've been working and meeting for the last couple weeks on this. They're going to work with each other to help ensure that they're satisfying the governor's guidelines in terms of sanitation of areas, and work together on trash solutions, and even work together. The governor's order does permit outdoor music as part of this, and I think that would be very Lake Bluffy to have that. So we're going to try to find a way to do that as well as part of this, and they're exploring those ways as well. So it's an attempt at normalcy while trying to obviously maintain public health at the same time within the guidelines to the best of all of our abilities. I'm grateful that the restaurants have been such creative in their thought and are very involved in this. With rare exception, I've spoken with all of them, with the exception of I've reached out to all of them. I've had, I think, good contact with almost all but 3. I would consider that, and some of those are on the west side. But I think there's ways to facilitate this. I think some restaurants are very aggressive and willing to start and wanting to start as soon as Friday, and as soon as lunch on Friday. So I think I know what the next 24 hours of mine would look like, working with them to ensure that we try to get all the paperwork in to accommodate this. But it's ambitious. It's been a lot in the work. I'm grateful to Peter Friedman and Ben Schuster to help put together all these agreements to help make sure all our T's are crossed and I's dotted to cover ourselves on this. But happy to answer any questions.
Drew,
I have a question for you.
Oh, go ahead, Regis.
Thank you, Mark. So this is going to involve altering the traffic pattern in Lake Bluff. So for example, in between the train station and basically Mavry's, we're going to take some of the existing road. How are we going to protect people that will be sitting at tables for what was before a road?
Yeah, so we have closed this area very frequently throughout the summer for various reasons, whether it be farmers market or block parties, bike races, parades. This area gets frequently closed. We use barricades. We've got a lot of this equipment ready to go. In fact, Jake this week has started painting some of the barricades to make them shiny and new looking. But we've got equipment to do that, largely barricades. And Jake, you're on the call. I don't know if you have any other specific comments other than the barricades we've historically used, and signage to ensure that people know where they're going and what's permissible and what's not.
Yeah, it's very similar to our farmers market setup. We're only just kind of rearranging a few things. And yes, we've been feverishly painting our barricades to make them look decent for the upcoming summer.
My concern would be, Drew, is this is also going to be at night. And so would that be enough to basically stop a car if people were, I mean, you can imagine the circumstances. I mean,
yeah.
Yes.
We have not explored putting in Jersey barriers or other, I would say, large pieces of concrete. I guess we could look into that. I think this is one of those things where we've had great success so far with what the systems we've been using in the past. Given that this will be for an extended period of time, we can certainly explore more of that. And maybe see, I don't know how easy it is to put our hands on a Jersey barrier. I don't think we have any at our public works facility, do we, Jake?
No, and just for FYI, I reached out to our vendor for a lot of our traffic supplies that we get barricades and stuff from, and they are swamped because everybody's starting to open restaurants out on streets. So now there's going to be a limited supply of barricades and things. So anything extra we need to get, we're going to have to plan and work hard to get.
Yeah. But we can certainly explore that and see if we can find something, Regis.
That would be awesome. Thank you, Drew. And
Hey,
thank you.
hey, Drew, this is Bill. My follow-up question to Regis is that since we have an issue that we cannot get a Jersey barrier easily in place, could we, by either President O'Hara's order or otherwise, reduce the speed limit? I'm sure it's already pretty low going through there, but reduce the speed limit as a follow-on, perhaps, precaution, given the circumstance we just discussed.
Are you describing on Sheridan Road?
No, I think I'm really
You're
looking
talking
at
Scranton, aren't you there, Bill?
exactly, Kathy. Yes, that's the question.
Okay.
Scranton.
I think it's something that we could discuss. Certainly is, how hard would that be to do? Right now, it's what? Is it 20, 25? We know, is the chief here?
He is. I'm just trying to think. At the most, it's 25 at the most, but people don't travel at that rate of speed typically.
I believe it's 25 right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Chief, do you see any problem set if we put it down to say 20 or 15? Is that going to cause a problem in terms of signage or enforcement, or is that necessary in your opinion?
I think it would actually create more work than the benefit we're going to get from it. I think people will adjust their speed depending upon the barricades, the people that are out there and whatnot. You might get that one, what would you call it, freak driver that's going to try and make it through quicker, but I think most of the people will conform to what's out there.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, the visual there would be you'll have cars parking along the north side, or I'll say the westbound travel lane in parallel. So visually, it will be a very small, narrow opening for them to travel through, which should, bottleneck cars through. It'll be, you would have to work hard to go fast through there, to go even like 10 miles an hour. Would you agree, Chief?
Okay. All
yes,
right.
I would agree. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, Drew, Mark here. Yeah, I would say that there are probably some opportunities for some creative use of planters or other structures besides the Jersey barrier that might be appropriate at the intersection of Scranton and Sheridan. But what I also wanted to say was that I'm really pleased with the village's response and cooperation with the local restaurants and businesses here to put this together, to be very proactive about this. I know there's been some buzz in the community about this, and I felt very confident that you and the businesses were already in discussion and already prepared to move this forward. And kudos to you guys and the team there.
I'll second that. Thank you.
And I will say so. Remember that it was only last week, and it was late last week when the governor dropped this surprise bomb on everybody. A good bomb, but it was a bomb, and had to scramble. But I do know that Drew and the restaurateurs have actually been discussing prior to this, so that helped, I think, in helping to formulate.
Yeah, we thought we had a month and a half to plan, and we were feeling good about ourselves.
I know, it's good. Okay, is there anyone out in the audience, Glenn? Whatever that has a question. Or?
President O'Hara, just if I may, to
Please.
Trustee Dewart's question about creative planters, we looked at even moving the existing village planters off the sidewalk out.
Mm-hmm.
We were concerned about how fragile they may be and that we may lose. So we're looking at those types of improvements, some sort of
For sure.
a more punitive barrier, if you will.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I was, if
Yeah.
we're looking at a 30, 60, or 90-day horizon here,
Yeah.
we probably are looking for something more than a crossbuck. And I echo Regis's concern. Somebody not from here pulling in off of Sheridan, attempting to come eastbound on Scranton, or obviously coming from the other direction would be real problematic for someone from, let's say, Donati's, who's trying to sit there.
Yeah.
They're not prepared for that kind of an eventuality, really.
Yeah. And we're trying also to be thoughtful with making sure our firefighters have a good emergency response area to, without creating so many barriers that they can't do what they need to do should something terrible happen either, right? The idea of the building. So anyway, I understand the concerns and we'll do what we can to try to accommodate those.
Okay. Again, I'll say, Glenn, anyone in the outside world have a question or a comment?
Certainly. So we did get 3 comments in while Village Administrator Urban was going through his explanation. These are all from Susie McMurray, who's the proprietor of Floatstone. And so I'll just read them in order.
Okay.
The first, I would not expect the village to take away any parking spaces from other businesses for the benefit of only the restaurants. The second, I am typically open in the evening. And the third, can you show the area in front of Floatstone, please? Which I think, incidentally, we did during the explanation.
Okay. All right.
I would say that, just to be clear on this with Susie, that so that was one of the things that I know the restaurateurs went back and forth over too. They were trying to be thoughtful of the other businesses. There are a lot of service businesses in there that are also coming back online at the same time. So the idea of how can we not or minimize the impact to the parking volume of parking stalls in the community. So that's why the area that was selected that we would consume parking stalls for the immediate future was to the far west end, and trying not to do anywhere else in the community. So again, trying to maximize the parking opportunities. And certainly I think immediately in front of Floatstone, there's no plans for taking any of those stalls out of service, Susie. So.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, I believe it's a roll call vote.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
Trustee Ankerman.
Aye.
Trustee Sherlow.
Aye.
Trustee Dewar.
Aye.
Number 11, which is trustees report. Do any of the trustees have anything they want to pontificate on this evening? Okay, hearing none. Executive session.
I'm sorry, President O'Hara, before we take up that, if there's no objection from the board, it'd probably be prudent for you to take the executive session meeting minutes first before going into closed session, since we would not have the opportunity to vote in an open session.
We are going in to discuss potential pending litigation.
But before we do the executive session meeting minutes, if there are no questions, the board can act on those while we're still in open session now, before we adjourn to a closed session.
Right, we will do the minutes. That's correct. All right, that's fine. Okay, so we have consideration of the minutes of the May 11, 2020 Executive Board meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Ankerman, and a second.
Second.
Second by Ms. Markey. Any corrections or additions to that? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
Trustee Ankerman.
Aye.
Trustee Sherlow.
Aye.
Trustee Dewar.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
All right. I think I can actually adjourn this meeting, can I?
We're gonna,
Executives. Yeah. What,
We're gonna, well, this is it, but executive session. Seven. Okay, that's right. I thought I could adjourn this and then go into executive session, trying to save a little time, but that's okay. All right. So do I have a motion to go into executive session to discuss potential and pending litigation?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Charlo. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Toll. Roll call, please.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
Trustee Ankerman.
Aye.
Trustee Charlo.
Aye.
Trustee Dewar.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
So Glenn, would you remind folks of our next step here?
Certainly. So members of the board have an invitation to a separate Zoom meeting where we'll do executive session there. I believe at the conclusion, we'll keep this webinar open. We'll stop broadcasting in the village's public access and so on. At the conclusion of that meeting, as I understand it, Village President O'Hara will come back into the room and she would declare the meeting adjourned, I believe.
Okay. All right.
I am looking for the
I am too.
link for that, Mr.
right.
Cole.
I will resend that right now.
We
Thank
would
you very
appreciate it.
much.
Thank you very much. All right. Go out of this meeting.